This is John William Boucher, or at least that's how I'm pronouncing it. Leave a comment below how it's actually Boucher or something. John has a fairly distinct honor amongst soldiers. He is the only Canadian to have ever fought both in the American Civil War and in World War I. Probably. We'll get into why that might not have happened in a few minutes. Even with that controversy, John is on record as being one of the oldest men to ever be drafted by the Canadian Army, possibly the oldest man drafted of World War I. Let's dive into it. John was born in Port Maitland, Ontario in 1844. His father was an army brat born to English parents in South Africa, and his mother had a similar upbringing but in Bombay, India. His father would pass in 1850, and John was sent to a boarding school as his mother was unable to care for him. In 1864, at age 19, he left the school to join the American Civil War. In Buffalo, he tried to get a posting in the Union Army, but was turned away. He tried again at Cleveland, but was also rejected, finally enlisting in Detroit with the 24th or 25th Michigan Infantry. He used both interchangeably. He supposedly fought at the Battle of Nashville, and was discharged sometime soon after. Post-war, he bounced around from job to job back in Canada. A surveyor, a railway stevedore, and a freight conductor for many of these small rail companies that would dot the eastern seaboard. He would settle with his family in Gananoque, Ontario, just north of New York State. The fishing trade kept his family fed, and his job at a carriage factory would keep a roof over their head. But tragedy struck in 1898, when his wife would pass away while in St. Louis. With his children out of the house and living their own lives, John was getting pretty lonely. In 1914, a world war would provide him with an opportunity to not only get out of the house, but also to meet some new people. John rushed to get recruited, but the physicians saw beyond his ploy. The age limit of recruitment was 45, and he was well beyond that, despite being in great shape for 71. 2 years passed, and with the Commonwealth's armies having been depleted, the enlistment age was raised to 48. John saw his chance. He walked into the recruitment office and let them know he was ready for service, and just a little older than 48. They approved it, signed his ticket, and he was off to England for training to become a sapper for the 257th Railroad Construction Battalion. The 257th were stationed in France and crisscrossed the front lines with narrow-gauge rail. According to Boucher, the men would call him Dad, as his face clearly showed his age. The 257th would follow the front line to Ypres, Belgium, and that's where John would take a turn for the worse. His rheumatism landed him in a field hospital, and the doctors were shocked that a man who was just shy of 73 had lasted this long on the front. For 8 months, Boucher had toiled away building rail line after rail line, never stopping or slowing down. As impressive as it was, he had to go home. He was starting to become a liability. So he was sent back to London to cavort with some of the nobility who found his story harrowing. On December 21st, 1917, he would be invited to Buckingham Palace to meet with the English King George V, who was surprisingly relaxed by Boucher's account. Finally returning to Canada in early 1918 to the warmest of welcomes, he traveled to the United States to boost morale and drive up confidence in the war effort. After World War I finished, he would move to Syracuse, New York, and started participating in Civil War and World War I meetups. At one, he was the youngest in the room, and at the other, he was the oldest in the room. He is an early example of what is now known as a snowbird. He would get his American citizenship in 1920 so he could spend his winters in Miami and his summers in Detroit with his daughter. John William Boucher would die in Miami at age 94. Remember those Civil War claims? They get kinda suspicious when you start looking into the 24th and 25th Michigan Infantry. The 24th Michigan does actually have a John Boucher in its roster, but this Boucher is a year younger. He was also discharged only a month later thanks to a surgeon certificate claiming he was disabled. John himself never lost a limb. The 24th Michigan also never fought at Nashville, but the 25th Michigan did. However, the 25th Michigan doesn't have a John Boucher on its roster, and there's no proof of him ever transferring. The other issues stem from his World War I service. He absolutely did serve in the conflict, but some of his tales from the front line sound very sketchy. He tells a yarn about his comrades coming across a burnt-out village. In the square, there was a piano that was rigged in sequence to mines out in a field. Every time a key was pressed on the piano, a mine would go off in the distance. On the last key press, a mine went off below the piano itself, killing all of the men. And if you actually believe that's a real story, leave a comment below so I can tell you that you're gullible. He also talks about his meeting with the king and how relaxed and cordial he was, even chumming up to him to smoke a cigar. Yes, it's true that George V was a hell of a smoker, but he also was a bit of a prig, aka someone who really cares about status. I'm doubtful that his meeting wasn't anything more than a bow and a bit of chit-chat. John could always spin a yarn, and that's why people loved him. He was courageous, friendly, and living his best life past the age of 70. He was a huge proponent of never letting a good story go to waste. Regardless of his Civil War experience and tall tales, John and all the other men who fought in World War I deserve a moment of silence. So please, join me in a minute of quiet reverence. Thanks for watching.